Welcome back, everybody, and for those of you that are new, welcome to this session. I'm really sorry about the technical part of this that you had to log back on. We will just give it a few minutes in the beginning to make sure that people have made it back. I see that most have, but we still have 10 people or so that weren't there from the first session. Yeah, I apologize for this technical situation. We won't have we won't work it out the same way when this session ends and the next one begins, but I will come back to that later on. But yeah, we'll just give it 2 minutes for people to show up, and then we will begin the presentation of this session. All right. We are now 3 minutes past, and we will start this session. I will give the control to Per, who will moderate the session, and then we will go from there. Thank you.
Or actually, could you give make Samantha presenter, because she's the one starting here. And just let me introduce ourselves. Well, I suspect that most of you were there for the first hour, but in case not, my name is Per Solé. I'm a transport planner at WSP Sweden. I'm based here in Malmö, in the very south of Sweden, and I'm the one responsible for our task within Reveal on dynamic curbside management. And with me today, we have Samantha Tharme from the City of London and Don Miller from the American company called Kerb, and they will also introduce themselves later when they are sharing their presentations. So Samantha, please go ahead and start presenting.
So I hope
we can see your screen. Yes.
Can you see it? Is that working?
It is.
Yeah. Great. So Per's already outlined that one of the cities within the Reveal research project. I'm a transport planner for the City of London, which I'll explain in a minute the context of what the City of London is within Greater London. But we are developing a pilot scheme we hope within a 3-year project lifetime for Reveal, to bring in zero emission zone in a small part of our city, but a part that is very densely occupied. The problem we have at the moment, like most urban centres, we still have air quality problems. We have high densities of people walking, peak periods, lunch times. We've got this area I work in is extremely high density office building, and most people finish their journey on foot. So we've got about 500,000 people a day coming into the area and then walking to the final part of the destination from the train station or the underground, the tube. Some people cycling, but still the most coming by public transport and then walking. And under current projections, apart from the fact that COVID has put everything on pause, current projections, we've got substantial growth predicted for this particular zone. On the screen at the moment, you can see zones coloured green. The one on the right-hand side of the picture is the area we're focusing on at the moment. And we're predicting that there'll be growth in numbers of people walking by 20,000 a day coming out of the station. So that's due to the Crossrail growth that the Transport for London is developing. So increased public transport, meaning that we end up with more people on the street. This is the main reason we need to be developing solutions. We have got a package of supporting measures which will go with the traffic restrictions we want to bring in. Logistics centres, last mile delivery, and zero emission waste collection are the two things that we're working on currently. We've already got the zero emission waste collection going on, and we
Samantha?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to butt in. I've just received some comments that people have a hard time hearing you because your sound is lagging. Would you mind turning off your camera so that we at least use the bandwidth for the talking?
Yep, I can do that.
Thank you very much, and sorry for butting in. Okay. Go ahead, Tim.
Okay. Yeah, am I loud enough? Is it just a delay that's the issue?
You're loud enough, that's fine. And it seems as if the sound is much better now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so as I said, we're looking at all the supporting measures we need to put in place as well, so that we can put these restrictions in, so that we start to reduce access to certain streets within this particular project area. Okay, now I'm not moving my... just to put this in a bit of context of where we are in London, don't know. This map shows you all the boroughs of London, and we are the small boundary number 1 right in the middle. So City of London occupies it's the smallest local authority within Greater London, but we have a daytime population of 500,000 people because people commute in to work in the city. So that sort of illustrates our size, but also the scale of the dynamics that we have to manage. And then some other London context elements. Although we're working on zero emission right in our area and right in the centre, TfL have introduced a much wider area of controls since April last year, 2019, which brought in much tighter standards for Euro 6 on all HGVs, and that has had a significant effect on NO2. We've seen great improvements. There's further intention to roll this out next year, which has been delayed a bit, but next year that will be continued. So, in spite of this improvement, we're still working on our tighter area. So, and again, the context for how we're looking at managing the small area that's our pilot study, this sits within the framework of the street network. Some people will be familiar with the sort of blocks and super blocks that have been developed in some Spanish cities. And although our shape is not a block, that same principle of having a street hierarchy, that you concentrate your through traffic on your major routes, and you then start to put restrictions on the local smaller streets so that you're really protecting that space for people walking. So the only vehicles that should be on the white streets in this plan are those that are accessing those particular buildings or dropping people off. Some of the bus network will still be allowed on a few of those streets, but predominantly any bus network should be on the orange part of this network. But the geographical perspective of our location, which is also one of our problems, is the fact that because we're right at the heart of London, we do have major bridges, so some of the major crossing points of the Thames, which obviously serve the whole of London, because if people are crossing, it concentrates that traffic into those areas. And we've got 5 bridges which come into the City of London, one of them pedestrian only, and then 4 other road bridges come into the city. The cycle network as well has been developed. Again, this links into the London-wide network. So this is sort of trying to make that principle of having safe journeys on a grid system, so that people can really travel significant distances. And that means we're linking in through the upgrades we're putting in as well. We think we're going to see another step change in cyclists, but again, this puts the context of how we're fitting into wider London. We've had an inevitable pause on the work that we're trying to do in our area, in our zero emission zone. St Mary Axe, which is what we'll talk a little bit more detail on in a minute, is one of the streets that is right in the heart of our zone, and we've got full closure of that at the moment because we put in place COVID response measures. But at the moment, we haven't got very many vehicles, but not very much human traffic in the city still. Not many of the buildings are fully occupied. So I don't think any of them are fully occupied, but not many of them are occupied at all at the moment. So we're working, but working and planning to how we can come back to life. And we have put lots of measures in to protect people, particularly cycling routes, because we think that is where there's going to be dramatic change. So the experimental scheme, which we should have put in July this year, but we will still do, we hope, early in the new year. So I would say February, March, if we get the go-ahead to do it. This is the first element of our bigger reveal project scheme, restricting motor vehicle access with the objectives of obviously fewer vehicles, better air quality. But again, this critical challenge for us is maintaining essential access to buildings. We know that there is a level of servicing which has to happen. Some of it during construction, and this is an area of fairly dynamic change, because there's always refurbishment of buildings, and the lifespan of office developments is often shorter than a lot of other buildings. So there's a high level of construction traffic, but then essential access to all the high-rise buildings for deliveries as well. So that's part of our challenge. We've been undertaking some detailed traffic surveys to know what we're trying to manage. We've got 53 in the recent surveys we've done. We've got, in our peak AM period, we've got 53 goods vehicles per hour entering the street, but that is only approximately a quarter of what traffic is moving through the street in that period, 194 average over the days. The closure periods are designed to protect the times when we have most people walking on the street. This is ultimately about comfort, safety of movement for people, and air quality. So those two peak periods of 8 to 9:30 and then 4:30 to 6:30 are the aim. The data we've recently collected covers, not surprisingly, pedestrians, traffic flows and loading activity. But we've done some really, really detailed loading activity surveys so that we know what the scale of the management challenge we've got, and how long people are loading for, how many buildings they're serving. Not only do we have loading directly on the street, there's a number of buildings on this route which have their own loading space, which they manage themselves, private space, but that still has to access via this route. So that's all coming into the figures of vehicles, that how are we going to manage them if we're closing the street at certain times during the day. So we can see that our peaks are for loading activity, goods vehicles are morning, but running up until 3 in the afternoon, it's fairly steady. And then the taxi and car traffic coming through the area, because there's a reasonable number of nighttime destinations in this area. And this is quite a good through taxis as well. But that peak tends to pick up after the restriction time that we're looking at, so that's less of an issue for us. Again, this shows, if you're looking at all traffic, it's a fairly constant picture through the day. Just a bit more detail on the fact that we've broken down what we're looking at in terms of number of vehicles. The on-street activity, we've looked in a great deal of detail at different sections of the road, and this is serving buildings with got multiple occupiers as well. So the management challenge isn't that we just deal with one or two big buildings. We've got the fact that within those buildings, although they have their own systems of management, they've still got lots of different occupiers, lots of different companies that they're serving. So there's a balance really in allowing those companies to operate effectively, whilst we're also, as we say, trying to clear the space. So that's really the nature of the challenge. Hence our detailed data collection, where we hope we're going to be able to start to move into saying, okay, if we've got these numbers and this is the pattern of loading and unloading, what more dynamic and sophisticated tool can we use to be managing this collectively? So again, just showing that the level of detail collected with our data. On-street activity is still going to be quite a challenge, because although we can put restrictions which insist that vehicles can come into the street and use loading bays, what we have often with people parking up is that they're waiting to go into a private loading bay. So whilst they may have their own management system, at the moment the street ends up being the holding zone for vehicles waiting to go into those buildings, which still gives us a challenge that we're managing them whilst they're waiting. They're still occupying space that we want to free up. And then this is just obviously just showing passenger drop off as well. The fact that there is a level of passenger requirements. Car in this instance is not really private car, it's mostly Uber type taxis, but they still just get classified as cars. We have very, very little private car traffic in this area. There's no car parking associated with these buildings, so it's not a demand we have to cater for, and there's very few residents in the area. So again, that we have the luxury of that not being a problem here, that we've got a single type of use, unlike some cities where you've got those competing demands and competing needs. And then lastly, these photographs just really give you an idea of the nature of the street. These are actually using the cameras that we use to do the data analysis and data collection for the analysis. And you can see they're not very wide streets. So once you've got one or two vehicles stopped and loading and others trying to get round them, people are really squeezed onto pavements. And again, it's not safe, it's not comfortable, and there's a lot of pressure on the street. So I think, and then I guess the other things perhaps to say in terms of the challenges we're facing, we've got our legal processes to go through. This we are developing this scheme as an experimental scheme, which that means we then do the consultation during that period as the minimum. However, we are already engaging with occupiers and talking to them about how they will operate and can they manage their system in a way that allows us to close the street in the 2 periods we want to. So some are quite cooperative and fully understand the fact that their building occupiers are the same people walking down the streets and are very helpful, but we have got 1 or 2 which are still struggling to work out how they'll manage all their deliveries in the periods, the outside the restricted periods. We have standard legal processes really everybody has to go through, and at the moment we haven't started those. We're still in informal consultation stages, but we certainly need to make sure we prepare adequately. It's likely that we'll get challenged, even from taxi drivers, though they don't need this street. There is usually a demand from them to keep as many streets as possible open at times. So I think those are the main points I wanted to bring up. I mean, we've got a strange situation at the moment, but we are trying to use the period of while the city's quiet to get ahead on some of our planning and make provision for the measures we want to bring in. So thank you, and hopefully there's some questions following. I don't know if questions now or we're doing that after the next speaker.
We will do that afterwards. First of all, we will let Dawn Miller to introduce herself and present a possible solution here, and you have to help me out here, Julie. Oh, you already have. I see. Good. So Dawn, please go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
We can.
Great. All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you for having me here today. My name is Dawn Miller, and I work at Kerb, a curb space management company. And before joining Kerb, I spent nearly a decade in New York City government regulating taxis and Ubers and Lyfts. And my company's platform helps cities manage their curb space, including through a mobile app that helps commercial drivers locate, book, and pay for loading space. I'll draw upon this experience to discuss some issues a city should consider in designing a program to manage loading. First, I want to talk about the concept of reservations. I think a fleet driver's fantasy would be predictable, available space whenever and wherever they need it. And often this translates into wanting to make advanced space reservations. So I'd caution you to think hard about the wisdom of advanced reservations for a few reasons. First, it's very hard for a driver to predict exactly when she'll arrive at a space. Life sort of happens. So when a driver is late for a reservation set for a specific time, it can create a series of cascading lateness, like at least in the States we see at the doctor's office. It also creates inefficiency because there's empty space awaiting the driver who might be stuck in traffic 20 minutes away. Second, specific reservations mean a driver cannot extend his time if things take longer than expected because he would be disrupting the next reservation. So this means that drivers either choose to disrupt their next reservation or they have to move their vehicle in the middle of the job, and that's certainly not desirable. So with all that said, we do think that providing better assurance that a zone will be available for a driver while he's on his way is helpful and creates an incentive to travel there rather than circle without any availability information or illegally parking. So where my company has landed is sort of an in-between solution. So we allow a driver to hold time in an available zone when he's half a mile away. So this provides helpful information and an incentive for the driver to travel to the space without causing the problems we see with a preset schedule of very specific reservations. Moving on to thinking about scalability and costs. So another consideration is, of course, the costs of any program or technology to manage loading. And although things like cameras and sensors can, in theory, really enhance a program, their purchase and installation and maintenance costs really add up. Things like that could make sense at a very high value location, thinking maybe an airport, but we see the real change in cities coming from programs that can scale to all of the city's busy commercial areas. So we think there's a lot that can be done using the mobile devices most of us are already carrying around. So I just say to exercise caution when exploring really capital heavy solutions. Another consideration is just how digital the loading experience should be. In the US, we thought that for city and public acceptance, at least for the near future, you do need some sort of on-street signage indicating what the space is for, even if that space is managed digitally. So we think that for now, this means you likely need the days and hours of operation for a digital loading zone on a sign. But that still leaves a lot that can be managed digitally and more dynamically. Things like prices, things like time limits, user groups allowed to use the space at any given time, opening or closing the zone entirely, and hours of operation among different user groups. So charging for space. Another thing to consider in designing a loading management program is whether you'll be charging drivers to use the space. In general, we recommend that you do. And the first reason is that it enables the city to practice demand management, much like some cities do for parking. So charging more and less for some locations and at different times of day to try to smooth the demand better across the day or otherwise shift behavior. Charging can also, somewhat ironically, help engage fleets in the program. People running fleets are juggling a lot. And frankly, I think when there's a financial element entering the conversation, even if it's not a tremendous amount of money, it can help get management's attention. And finally, given the growth in deliveries that most places around the world are seeing, many cities don't currently have the right mix of parking, loading, and other curb allocations. So by charging for both loading and parking, the city can choose the mix that meets its mobility needs without worrying that one choice forgoes revenue while another generates it. So fleet participation and enforcement. So I wanted to also provide some insights around fleet engagement and enforcement. Although there are some exceptions, in the US at least, I believe fleets are, relative to cities, satisfied with the status quo in terms of loading. Enforcement here against illegal loading is often low, often the fines aren't high enough, and they're accepted as a cost of doing business. So I think cities are the ones really worrying about the safety and congestion impacts, and in some cases climate impacts of the status quo. So although you should certainly design your programs to work as best as you can for the fleets and other businesses, I also don't think you can necessarily wait for their approval, or you could spend years in stakeholder meetings and might not get much of anywhere. So regulation and enforcement, in addition to a partnership approach, are likely needed. But talking about enforcement a little more, perfect public compliance with a booking system is likely neither necessary nor possible. Instead, we think about shooting for good reliability for drivers. So this doesn't mean that 100% of the time a hold on a space results on a successful booking, but it does mean that there's success something like 90% plus of the time. There's also a lot of talk about automated enforcement using cameras and the like. And this is an exciting arena to explore. You know, I work for a technology company. We can't help but be curious about this stuff. But we also see a lot of both technical and legal issues to work through for that to become more widespread solution. So, you know, thinking about what can be done in the nearer term, you should also consider whether you can make progress today using technology to enhance the way you already do enforcement. And these might be systems that alert enforcement when there's a likely issue, but ultimately it's a human who is checking out the situation and taking action. And so finally, I wanted to emphasize that even with identical technology system, the underlying conditions in the city and the program design choices really impact program success and adoption. So these include things like the ability and willingness to enforce the program, and whether the neighborhood is a fit for the program, or the curbs there really a contested space that needs more active management. It certainly sounds like City of London is one of those spaces, but it's just something to consider for others on the line. Is the city requiring payment? Are you only creating new loading spaces, or are you creating new ways to access existing spaces? Is there sort of a critical mass of space dedicated to your new program, or is it really so minor that it doesn't incentivize adoption or have the opportunity to really demonstrate a difference on your streets? And so with that, I think I'll wrap up and just thank you all for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the discussion.
And I will say thank you to you, Dawn. And I will just give a add on to your presentation and doing a quick supplementing overview to different solutions and technology. And I should be sharing my screen now, am I?
Yes, you're sharing your screen.
Good, thank you for that one. So I just want to say that there's a number of providers here on the likes of course, there are also promoting and delivering digital platforms for curbside management. And this includes data visualization, permits, enforcement procedures. And this is a picture from Appleway, and we seem to have the one attendee here from Appleway also in our meeting. So we will let Ben in here in a few minutes as well to join into the discussion. And this could potentially be something of use also for introducing the scheme that Samantha is looking for. And then bookable or loaded bays that are potentially available for reservation, because there's maybe a distinction there. And what we have found is that different solutions, of course, then fits different needs. I mean, a freight delivery, which is regular on time every Monday at 10 a.m., often have a longer loading time. And that would be interesting to see if you, Samantha, do you have also this information in your data, who is actually doing the delivery and what are they actually delivering? And there's also a provider offers a function which could maybe mitigate the problem which Dawn raised there of if you arrive to a bay which you have reserved or booked and it's occupied for any sort of reason, that you could put up a virtual loading bay just close by as a least worst alternative. And here's some futuristic signage here in the picture, showing how this could look on street, and this is something that is developed right now. And then of course there's a lot of providers and a lot of different set of technologies for sensing technology to provide real-time occupancy data. Here's a picture of an in-ground one. Usually they combine magnetometers and radars. And you at City of London, so I think you have, I've read that you have contracted sensors to be installed in disabled bays. And I don't know if that has already happened and been implemented. That would be interesting to hear if you have any bit of information on that, because that could maybe be something of use as well for our scheme. Maybe not like now in our pilot, but maybe later. And my last slide is that there is also other alternatives here I mean, there's the terminology is much the same. That here it says smart loading zone, smart loading permits and bays, and this is not a reservation or booking solution, but more at when you arrive to a loading zone or loading bay, you buy an application, issue a time limited permit for that specific bay when you arrive, and then when you depart, you end it. And that gives everyone the information on availability for other users, which potentially then have some efficiency gains. And here are the effects and benefits which are claimed by from different trials, and this is mostly claimed from self-evaluated trials for different solutions. And I don't want to go through all of them because it's about the same I said earlier in my earlier presentation, but it also gives, of course, a usage data to the city, so you get more higher definition data, and you can see who is loading and what are they delivering and everything, type of vehicle. Yes. Is that also something you have in your data as well, Samantha? The type of vehicle?
Yes, we do. Can you hear me okay? Because I've switched to headset. Yeah, we do have type of vehicle. We have which buildings they're delivering to. So we have quite detailed data that we collected for that particular street. We've got some wider data collection over the whole city, which gives us some averages across other areas. But on this one, we've got all of that: purpose, nature of delivery, type of vehicle, and so on.
Okay, and we also have a question here from our audience, and it is that I think it's mostly for Dom. Do you have any problems with reservation bays for being smartphone only? I mean, we have a talk later here today with San Francisco and the equity issues with using smartphones.
Yeah, that's a good question. It doesn't come up a lot because I think because this is a real business use case, and I think there are equity considerations, but I think they're generally more acute when we talk about access, when we're talking about the general population, whereas penetration of mobile access, mobile phones is quite high for people driving for business. That said, I think when it does come up, and I'm sure there will be city partners for whom it is a sticking point. There are kind of workarounds out there. One city we work with for their parking has an IVR system, so that if you don't have a smartphone, you can still call and make a booking via phone. So I think if you get creative, and it's very important to a city, you can find ways to kind of get over that hump. You wouldn't get full functionality as far as knowing ahead of time the availability and things like that, but you could still find ways to give the vehicle access to the space when they're there.
I see. And this, to the specific case we have here, Samantha, the users here they most often operators and private firms, or are there also ordinary citizens who can use these loading bays?
Well, at the moment, there's no restriction on who can use a loading space. None at all. It's one of the things we want to have a look at, though, is can we restrict use of loading bays and even some of our parking bays to commercial vehicles only? So that will be by type of vehicle, but for it being an organisation rather than an individual. So we're looking into that at the moment.
Okay. there was also a question here, what is a virtual loading bay? I have to explain this. That's why I have this slide up, and that's I think it's a trademark for the actual provider, and that's the solution that if you arrive, there's a possibility and agreed on with the local traffic order that you could potentially in London, you have a double red line for no stopping, I think, and then you could for a limited amount of time set up a virtual loading bay on that piece of stretch of the street which is next to the actual loading bay which was occupied, and it's a way to just mitigate the saying, okay, if this happens, we still would like it to be done in a proper manner, and then you can load here for a short period of time. Okay, we also have an attendee from Appyway, which is, I think, in part a competitor to Course. I will let Ben Barcher-West be part of the discussion here as well, and see if you have any thoughts and reactions to what Samantha and Dawn and myself already have said. Ben, are you here? Oh, there you are.
Yeah, I am. I hope everyone can hear me well.
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, no, thank you. And at short notice to be pulled in, a really good panel. I think both, Samantha in particular covered a lot of the issues that we see. I just wanted to share one of the projects we have with Transport for London, the Freight Lab project. We're exploring there the opportunity of booking and reserving a loading bay. And we've spoken a lot here in the panel about the reservation potential of a specific bay, or understanding the availability, all of the characteristics on a particular bay, and getting access to the TRO that overlays on that bay. We're trying as a first step in our project to take a slightly different approach, take a very much a demand-driven approach, and the demand being, access to a location. Location comes with a proximity. So we're trying to work with 4 different freight providers in the Freight Lab consortium to understand what kind of proximity they would accept on a delivery. It could be 10 meters, could be 50 meters. In some cases, at the driver's preference, it could go out to half a kilometer. And what we're trying to understand is how we would digitize enough of a network, enough bays within that kind of proximity to offer availability and reservation nearby. And what we've found is there's an opportunity there not to disrupt a particular bay, but in a virtual world still provide access without suffering a lot of the pitfalls on the physical world of having to change a bay, change street signage, confuse people who maybe aren't part of the digital community and have to understand at the cash machine, at the physical signage, what's going on. And we're finding that to be quite successful. So that trial area we're about to deploy and launch is in the Earl's Court area along the Earl's Court High Street, and focuses on both sort of light and heavy commercial vehicles. But it really focuses around proximity for trip purpose. It's something that we talk about a lot in our business. So I just wanted to add that slight insight. Rather than specific bay, maybe now it's the time to think about an area or close to, and providing availability and providing booking reservation there. You can, of course, then include private sites as well, which increasingly is a business model we're seeing in sort of tier 2 and tier 3 towns, where the high street is small, the kilometers is very short, but there's a lot of off-street capability in leisure centres, in gyms, in shopping centres that could also be utilised. Slightly different perhaps to the Westminster.
No, but it raises a fair question, because we heard Samantha earlier saying that some of the uses which were said labeled parking was actually some kind of holding base for deliveries going off street. That would, I mean, to mitigate that, I think you have to tap into the local off-street management, loading management. Or what do you have what kind of a relation do you have to these off-street loading bays, Samantha? Do you have an overview of them and so on?
So they are privately managed, privately controlled, and at the moment we have the only thing we can do is restrict access to them. So we can't tell them how they manage inside the private space. But if we could, by agreement, get a platform that means it's being managed together, that would be ideal, because then your public space and your private space should be managed at the same time. Do it through the same system. but that would take them coming on voluntarily. And sometimes local authority interference in businesses isn't always the most efficient. Sometimes it's better. So it might be something that set it up as part. We do have business organisations, which business improvement districts, which are set up as a partnership really between us and the businesses. And if that's a sort of role that they might be able to facilitate better than we can, because if you step away from our fairly lengthy procedures to set things up, then that might work. But yeah, technology probably allows us to do that. It would be all parties being willing to hand over control to someone else, basically.
Yeah. We also have a question from our audience, both mentioning other examples of cities policies or measures, and naming the example of Mechelen in Belgium. And the question, I think, is about cargo bikes, and you show that you have some sort of last mile trials as well, and scheme for that. I mean, if you are to manage the Kerb, and how can we include cargo bikes? Because I mean, you want them to happen, because then you take the pressure off the street a bit, because they're smaller sizes and are zero emission, but maybe they are harder to enforce. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be a very interesting development, because we're actively encouraging cargo bikes. We're setting up hubs which will, we hope, be predominantly cargo bikes, and they wouldn't be restricted by the proposals we've got at the moment. So if we were saying no vehicles at certain times, that's not going to be preventing cargo bikes. But if they start to become a problem in themselves, we might have to have volumes change, so that we have an issue, then we have to do something about management. I mean, legally, there's nothing to stop us legally preventing cargo bikes, but at the moment we're encouraging.
Okay, thank you. And Dawn, you're still here, aren't you?
And sorry, just to add, I would say, so just to add on that, I don't think we have any difficulty bringing cargo bikes into any management system, because they're using apps already. Yeah.
So they are already proliferate technology users. You heard Ben mentioning a more demand approach. I expect you also do that in part, Dawn. And in what way have you included different like trade associations or logistics groups in designing your schemes?
Yeah, we've talked to them a great deal to kind of understand some of their needs, and what's interesting, and I think that the cargo bike question really highlights this, is that there is such a variety of types of entities doing deliveries. You know, we're a New York City based company, so I think when we started thinking about a lot of this stuff, we were really thinking about FedEx and UPS and those types of parcel deliveries the most. But then as we work with different US cities, they have big issues with semi, like huge trucks. And so like as we're kind of working in different parts of the city, that's kind of just different cities across the country, we're always kind of asking like which vehicle types are your problem areas, because what's cool about a digital system, and I imagine at B-Way works the same, is that there's a lot of configurability you can do to meet the needs of that city and the operators there. So you can create different user groups and give them different times or locations of access based on basic, you know, what the goals are for the program. You know, I think some of our cities, their big issue is the on-demand food delivery. That's what's that's what's driving them insane. And then others, they just don't have that at all. So I think that's kind of the power of the digital system, is that it can be highly differentiated from site to site, and from city to city.
I see. And I mean, I think this is a question for Samantha. Do you have a priority to low emission vehicles, or can you have that within the system, you think?
Yes, you can. Now that we have legislation which allows us to restrict by emission standards. So if we wanted to say, we ultimately think we're going to get to a point where we say no vehicles at these times, and then periods where we are allowing vehicles in, we want them to be zero emission. So then we might have a tiny window at the end of the day that allows any vehicles in. But yeah, we definitely can restrict by emission standards, and that's one of the things we intend to do.
And this is something that could be included in out of your solutions, Ben or Don. Can you go ahead, maybe Ben? And is there a way to give priority to low emission vehicles?
Yeah, priority we've grappled with a lot internally, to the extent of, do you end up with a sort of God complex? How do you be the adjudicator of access to the city, and what right do we have? But for sure, I mean, we'd follow the current regulations and guidelines being trialled in many local authorities, but in particular Westminster. The equal challenge is, if you introduce these types of things, is there some sort of pay, and highest bidder wins? So these need to be handled carefully.
And your experience, Dawn?
Yeah, I'll just add, I'm not sure if anyone has been following the organization LACI, the LA Clean Tech Incubator. They're working to roll out a voluntary zero emissions delivery zone, actually not in LA, but in Santa Monica, its neighbor. And they are looking for Kerb management to be a big part of that, and to use Kerb access as one of the incentives for zero emissions vehicles, for companies to roll them out, essentially, because it is voluntary. So I think that will be kind of a project for all of us to really watch, to learn things about, how there are other components of this broader pilot program, but to see how valuable is the space to the fleet. Is this something that's valuable enough to them that they actually might make a different decision in their vehicle, or perhaps it's valuable enough when combined with other incentives? So we're very excited to see how that one goes, because there are values that cities are trying to promote besides, I think, as Ben said, the highest bidder or things like that. There's other things going on too. So how do our systems help achieve those?
I think that's always the question when you give a mode space, or you allocate space both in the street and at the curb, that there's never a fixed demand. You can always try to change and influence the demand to some extent. It's sometimes only maybe for the operators to change their behavior. What would be your experience on this? Have you seen any big changes in the way private businesses operates from introducing your schemes? Should you go ahead, Dawn?
Yeah, so our system that I've discussed, the booking system, is really in early pilot stages. We did the kind of the technical test in Omaha starting last month. And there it's, speaking of kind of contested curb space from my presentation earlier, Omaha was a fantastic partner for being able to roll out this program in the real world quickly. But that downtown is really suffering from a slowdown to COVID. And so when the curb space is not hotly contested, there's less competition, and frankly, I think less need for these like sophisticated management systems when there isn't that contested space. In contrast, next month we'll launch with the city of Aspen, Colorado, which is an outdoor activity mecca, so they're extremely busy right now because people are still engaging in those types of activities. So I think that will be the first like really strong signal we get about whether the system is causing fleets to make changes in their behavior. And it's kind of iterative, right? Because it's what does the fleet do, but then what does the city learn from a policy perspective in response? Do they learn from the system that they need more space for loading or different locations for loading? So I think a lot of the cities we were working with don't have that amazing study that Samantha showed. They don't know all of that. So they're starting out with very little data, and starting to run one of these programs is actually the way they're beginning to build that data so that they can kind of right size their program and configure it.
I see. It's a good way of compiling data and doing a pilot at the same time. And Ben, do you have any experience in how the schemes you are introducing with your solution would affect the behavior of fleet operators?
Yeah, I think, I mean, little to add on what Dawn said. I completely agree. The only thing I draw out for particularly the operators that we see is the OPEX opportunity and the effectiveness of change directly on their balance sheet. So if we get this right, it's more deliveries, it's less parking tickets, it has safety improvements for both driver well-being and people sort of operating around these vehicles. So a lot of the operators are sort of heavily engaged to bring success here because of the sort of true business need that they can attribute to getting this right. Now, we've not cracked it yet. There's a long way to go, but there's definitely a real sort of business opportunity here as well.
And when introducing your technology, I mean, I mentioned earlier in my introduction to dynamic curve management that potentially there could be a problem if you have like both style organizations and then also like systems working as like on their own as a silo. Is it possible to integrate your solutions with what the cities already have? Have you encountered any barriers there?
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, Perry, thank you. I'm sure, I think Dawn will have experience as well. Cities are all different levels of digital capability. We very much see ourselves as a sort of data company, and you know, APIs and SDKs are getting so sophisticated now within the local authorities that this technology can be embedded within a wider operating system. There's still a lot to develop to get the quality in place. So the whole industry is in the pursuit of real-time and predictive availability, bookings and reservations. There's a lot of external noise factors still to get right, and right through to, you know, many of the large logistic firms, the actual drivers of those vans don't necessarily have a work smartphone. Now, they may have one privately, but should they be sort of forced to have to use their private systems to access these things? So there's still a lot of threads to get right. But yes, increasingly that digital interface with cities is getting more sophisticated and enabling this type of function.
Yeah, and go ahead, Per.
Yeah, go ahead. Now, I think that, I mean, this is what we also provide. You also provide the backroom or the dashboard functions of managing your streets. I mean, and what do you encounter?
So yeah, the Mapper program that we have.
Well, yeah, well, I mean, both you. Sorry, that was a question for Dawn. I mean, both of you do that as well. I interrupted you, Dawn. You were about to start talking. I was just thinking out loud and saying that when you have introduced your solutions for this specific aspect, I mean, it should, of course, interact with the system the city is already having. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, what's good is that every city we talk to like asks this question and wants to talk about it, right? Like they get that we can't have a million separate systems working in silos, and so it's good they always ask the question, and it's a lot of different possible integrations, right? There's integrations within enforcement systems. There's integrations with kind of mainstream applications like a Google Maps or a Waze, and there's integrations with existing kind of proprietary technology used by the big fleets. A lot of them have their own dispatch software. And we absolutely believe that that is the way this needs to go. We don't expect in the long term a driver to flip between a Cord app to find his booking space and maybe whatever navigation or dispatching app he's using for the rest of his work. Right now, while we're all in, I think, this like intensive learning phase, while we're figuring out how exactly does this work best, you know, we have our own tools because then we're able to like pretty quickly like keep changing them until we get it right. But the long-term vision is to do those integrations. The challenge will be, and I think anyone who's kind of worked in the space knows, is integrations require different companies to work together. And so often, especially the existing company who already has a contract with the city, they will want to be compensated for integrations. So that just can sometimes become a barrier. The other thing to think about is, at least in the States, we have a real mix of cities having kind of more modern parking systems and things like that, and modern enforcement systems that are more smartphone based, and those that have a legacy system that's kind of a standalone tool. And there's like varying levels of ease of doing those integrations. So it's where this all needs to go. But I think it's, if we want to learn quickly and figure this piece of it out, it's good to keep it separate for now until everyone is ready to make those investments in integration.
That might be a question also for you. Okay. Were you speaking, Ben? Otherwise, it's a question also for you, Samantha. I mean, to what extent do you have systems which you are using where you are happy with them, or do you see this being a problem in the future if you are to add features or functions?
I mean, well, in terms of systems, at the moment we don't have anything other than on-street enforcement. So it's, yeah, I mean, anything will be more sophisticated than what we've got at the moment. I think whilst we've got some, fairness is always one of the things that comes into any issue you have about legislation. And I think the point that Ben made about playing God, you know, okay, we can move forward with a level of acceptability on what generally people find acceptable, but we're always open to what's a fair right of access to a book, and particularly that happens in residential locations more than business. And this pilot area, we're not talking about residential locations, but across the city we have got residential, and that is one of the locations we're currently running into some issues. Whilst we're not restricting people's access, there is still a discussion now going on legally about or legal framework of is it reasonable, the restrictions we're placing on residents, and that isn't a black and white issue. That's a level of acceptability.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? Yeah.
Well, I think in part you also elaborate on other parts which are really aspects which are interesting. I'm also thinking about, do you have this kind of digital inventory of the street, so you know what part of the digitized, what part of the street is a bus stop, or where you have a parking, loading, and so forth?
Yes, we do. Yeah, we do have that. We don't have map-based traffic orders, which I know some local authorities do. Which, yeah, you can do it, but we don't have it in place at the moment.
Okay, so you have it partially.
But we have
then.
digitized. We do have digitized space. Yeah, we have that. We have the topography and the layout of the streets mapped digitally. And if we wanted to apply the traffic orders to that, we could do. Yeah, we could do. It's physically possible.
Okay, and I think that we have a question from our audience on exactly this, and to you, Ben, that regarding the lack of digitized data in cities, You mentioned earlier that you have a way of getting around this. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's not appropriate to go through it now, but yes, we can create those digital surveys to create a digital TRO twin, and it is from that our whole journey begins. So to understand in data world where the TROs start and end with a sort of sub-meter accuracy, bearing in mind that the legal and enforcement role that is in parking. And then once you have that digital asset, we provide the tools and means to maintain it. And it is to that asset that we then look to augment with real-time availability and the types of functions and features that we've described today.
Okay, and this is something also I think expect you do as well, Dawn, or?
That's right. Yeah, when working on a smart zone program with the city, one of the steps is always to help them create a digital inventory. And we accomplish that either by ingesting files they already have and kind of putting them together in a way that is meaningful, both for their kind of analysis at their desk and for communication with vehicles through APIs. And if they don't have the files, we have an augmented reality iPhone app that allows them to very easily collect all the assets along the street to get a really granular view of who can do what and when and where, which can be very complicated in cities. And we don't focus on just the loading space. Like we digitize all of the curb uses because we hope that, really managing loading spaces is just the beginning, that this kind of feeds into a more comprehensive, like better allocation of curb space for all types of uses, and then building towards a more kind of active digital management of all types of uses over time.
Yeah, well, that's at least what I hope as well. And when doing this, what is your experience from working with open data? You can go ahead, Dawn.
Working with open data. So yeah, it really depends on what a city has. So, in the US, both Seattle and New York City have amazing open asset data. So every day we read that in and then we run it through our system to create an up-to-date digital inventory for each of those cities, whether it's for use by the customer or whether it's for use the customer as in a city customer, or whether it's for use by a mobility company, because mobility companies are often interested in that API because they want to know where their vehicles can legally park as well. But I would say in the States, New York and Seattle are the exception. The more common scenario is that they really don't have enough digital files to even for us to pull together a good inventory, never mind having it on open data. And there's some set that's in between that has enough digital files for us to pull together in a meaningful way, but they're not open. So I think that was one of the reasons I think my company didn't set up to create a data collection tool, but we kind of decided to do that once we learned that this was a real need for a lot of cities. And we do believe having a comprehensive look at your curb space is important for scalability, right? Like, if we want to make a difference in things like congestion and efficiency, and circling around, like blowing pollution into the air, like it has to be something that we think about beyond a pilot area that can roll out citywide. And the types of inventory we do, and it sounds like Appiway does some of that as well, I think help do that. And so I think sometimes the city begins with an interest in doing the active program, but while they're at it, we try to build that toolbox for them to go do the next thing afterward.
I see. And when we have you here, we got a question here for what do you mean? Did you say spy phone app? Sounds scary. What is that?
Sorry, iPhone app.
iPhone app. Okay, not so scary. Okay,
No,
and then
an iPhone. It can even be an old iPhone. It's nothing too fancy.
okay. Ben, what's your experience from working with open data? What's your approach?
Yeah, it is very varied, as Dawn highlights. So, cities like Chicago and the CTA, a lot of good, open data sets and equality as well. Columbus, we've had some discussions with them, and it looks like they have a good level of base data, let's say. The UK is quite diverse, let's say, in capability. Partners like TfL know a lot about movement, but we're still capable to put the buses on diversion and cause bridge strikes and get buses stuck in one-way streets and things. So what we find is there is a level of digitization, but it varies inside each department. So as Dawn mentions, the air quality guys, very sophisticated, a lot of investment has been put their way over the last 5 years, very enabled. The tree surgery, the guys cutting the trees, roadworks, permits to put cranes onto the streets, residents ordering skips. A lot of these other systems that local authorities have to provide are still text-based. Microsoft Word is still heavily used and innovative in some departments. So we're still waiting for a huge amount of aggregation, digitization at a level that can give us enough insight within a local authority to go and turn on these things. We are very much a data company, and we're having to build where we find gaps. But I think increasingly there should be more investment, certainly from central government, to get local authorities tooled up. And for sure we can help, but I think there is no future where a local authority can't afford to do this. Increasingly as part of their own agenda, and it may sound obvious, but it is still sort of slow to come to fruition.
Yeah, I think this is a good message for cities, and connects to what I presented earlier, and on saying that maybe you should look up if there are standards to work from and standards to follow, because I don't think cities can do this and invent this on their own, and of course they shouldn't. And we have data, and if this could potentially be because when we are looking at different solutions and like the future smart city, most of that relies on that what we already can do is implemented. So all this talk about what you could do relies on what that the cities actually work smart, and they move away from Microsoft Word, as you mentioned. How big of a barrier is this that some cities are behind in these aspects? Do you want to go ahead, Ben?
Sure, thank you, Per. As I mentioned, I think it is potentially a huge barrier. I think naturally there is a sort of timeline for the increasing digitization of services. The challenge is the ability to sort of leap ahead. And when we talk about systems as sophisticated as managing the booking and reservation of a physical bay, we're a long way from digitizing all the demand, as we said, kind of brokering that demand into a win, paid and complied type categorization. And also, smartphone penetration, and it's often overlooked, but is still very valid. Yes, it's increasing daily, but these systems can't depend on an individual having a connection. They may be at work, they could be a nurse delivering healthcare, they could even be offline, and there's no reason why they should then sort of fall out of these systems. So my nervousness always with that point is I equally don't want to put this technology on a 20-year timeline when every living organism is connected, and then we can have these types of systems. I don't want to wait. So I think inside certain use cases, car club users, freight and logistics vehicles that use maybe tolling, electronic tolling systems, things like that, we can start to explore these, tempered with an appropriate time to go for the mass market. And loading and freight is a good one, because it goes out saying most of these vehicles are increasingly connected, and indeed many of these drivers have some way in which to access the service from the Kerb or about their person.
Yeah. There are, of course, a number of initiatives set out to tackle this, and there's I was reminded of a project just started after this summer in September called UVABox, who's set out to establish a framework and how to structure data on urban vehicle access regulations, which will be quite interesting to follow. I would like to move over to the question of enforcement, because I mean, you can introduce a scheme, a tool, and a solution, but on street, for making it happen, how do you? Maybe you can start, Samantha. How do you enforce this loading space today, and where do you see that you want to be in the future?
So at the moment, enforcement is traffic orders, signs on the streets, and then traffic wardens, people on the street out enforcing the restrictions. We have camera enforcement on some of our road closures, but not on loading bays. And I don't think we can use camera enforcement for loading bays at the moment. But I'm not sure about that. So if we could move to a system that meant we didn't have to have people going out, because obviously it's random, they can't be in every single location at all times, and they just tend to enforce infringements on the hotspot areas. So if we had a dynamic system that fined people as soon as they went over their period, that would be great. But then I guess our bigger issue in terms of problems on streets is when people aren't in loading bays, but they're actually loading directly onto curb space where we've got restrictions and double yellow lines. So that's probably the locations we'd like to get into more. If we could manage, I don't know how we could do that though. I don't know whether the legislation allows us to do that, to do camera enforcement of double yellows.
Is there a certain reason you know of why you can't use them? Use cameras for enforcement?
So you have to be permitted to use cameras for specific purposes. So there was a bit of legislation written to allow bus lanes to be enforced by cameras. Then there was another bit of legislation which allowed us to use cameras for traffic road closures, so access restriction. And I don't know if the legislation currently allows us to use it for loading activity. I'm really not sure. It does allow it in bus lanes. So if somebody was loading in a bus lane, then we could use a camera. But I'm not sure that we can just on a standard road.
I see. So there has to be connected to a specific function, really.
You have to be permitted legally. That's the thing, is you have to be. You can't just choose to do things if you're going to.
Is this a question that you as the City of London own by your own, that you could just change legislation, or you're dependent?
No.
It's on a national level.
No, that's what I mean. It's a national level where it's decided what local authorities are allowed to do.
And when you mention cameras, that's like CCTV cameras on poles fixed.
Well, it would be, yes, but it's the specific thing about ANPR, about automatic number plate recognition, where you're capturing data and then fining people. So that's where you start to get into the issues of why there's a lot of legal framework behind the scenes.
I see. But have you considered, or you have of course discussed the possibilities with mounting ANPR cameras on a vehicle circulating?
Yeah, we've got that. We do have that.
You do have that already?
Yeah, but I don't know if we're allowed to use those for double yellow lines or not. I'd have to check. Okay.
Then again, you might need a change in the legislation for being able to do that, if I understand you correctly.
We might be able to use that at the moment. I'd have to check.
Worth looking up. And going up to you, Dawn, what are your experience with enforcement and with discussing with cities? I mean, if you do a pilot, maybe you could have the luxury of having officials standing there, just like looking and seeing if do people understand the scheme and everything, and then enforcing at the same time. But what are your experiences there?
Yeah, so, and I touched on this a little bit in my presentation. I think eventually we will get to a far more automated sort of enforcement. But right now, same as Samantha was saying, there's a lot of legal barriers. Look, same in the States, localities need specific permission to use cameras for to enforce certain types of regulations. And they're generally expanding, but there's definitely some states where there's no, you cannot issue a violation at all unless someone has physically placed it on a vehicle. So I think there's progress being made, but there's definitely legal barriers, and kind of going along with that are a few like complicating factors. You know, one is people are uneasy with cameras in some cases and surveillance and that kind of thing. Countervailing that is some people like cameras because they don't have human biases in terms of enforcement. So some people like them for that reason. So there's kind of a lot there with cameras right now. Though I think, you know, there's progress being made. The other thing that sometimes comes up is people oppose them as kind of a money grab by municipalities. So the framing and making the compelling case for why this is to promote safety or some other important community goal, not exclusively a money grab, is very important. And there's a lot of data to back up their effectiveness. So I think it's just kind of bringing enough people around. But kind of because of those barriers that are often in place today, we're not going to kind of wait for those all to be resolved to start rolling this stuff out and learning and doing the best enforcement you can. And I don't think you need 100% compliance to have an effective program. So what I see as very interesting now is what can our technology do to enhance the job that human enforcement officer is doing. So in the case of our technology, you know, if someone does report that, you know, his or her spot was taken, they tap that and it sends a live alert to enforcement. So if anyone's nearby, they can go check that out. So it's more information than they usually have. Usually they're more circulating on like a route and don't have anything kind of driving them in a demand responsive way. Another thing I see, I believe the city of Miami does this, is and I think it's kind of clever, is they still have that law where they have to place a violation on a vehicle, but what they do is they have their license plate recognition vehicles going around and doing the scans of license plates and based on those scans alerting the officer to go over there, kind of same approach. So I think it's important that like we kind of do the best we can with what we have, while kind of in a parallel stream we work on the technology and policy side to get to those systems that can be even stronger than what we have today.
Fair point. And Ben, I know that you have you also I don't know if you do it yourself, but you market these base sensors, which could be a part of your schemes as well. Am I right?
Yeah, that's right. So we've got the ability. I think our outlook is to try and move away from enforcement, or at least, as Dawn mentioned, you know, make it very clear why enforcement is needed. We see there is probably always a backstop. There's always a role for enforcement, but you know, using our parking sensor, we can flag when a vehicle is about to expire on its session for that TRO, and this can help sort of optimize the foot soldiers from a randomized search for infringement into something more targeted. Key for us, as I mentioned at the beginning, is really understanding trip purpose. There's a very, very small minority who really cause abuse and misuse of parking. It's often more a root cause of a delivery has taken too long, or something has happened. You know, that person is still on the high street shopping, spending money in our local economy. Do we really want to punish them for that? So in Harrogate, we've moved to this kind of linear pay-as-you-go, pay-by-minute system. The general public enjoy that, because although there's a backstop of enforcement, they effectively pay only for the access of minutes that they use. So it's very transparent into, you know, when infringement can occur. Where we see the real disruption is things like mother and daughter bays being misused, or car club bays maybe being used, electric bays being used by non-EVs. These types of disruptive things are a lot more complex to manage digitally, and therefore there's often a need still for that physical piece. And as Dawn identifies, many UK cities still have the need to physically ticket, to physically prosecute with a legal notice that an offence has occurred, and that they are beginning proceedings. And that is the evidence by which both parties are made aware. This isn't easy to digitize until the law changes. That is very much a central government thing, as Samantha identifies.
Okay, I see. Well, we just have a few minutes left here, and I hope that we will have the possibility and opportunity to get in contact with you when we are getting further in what we set out to do in London. And I would ask you, Samantha, if you have a final question now for Ben and Dawn, and also then following up that, if you, Ben and Dawn, have a final message you would like to say to us, and maybe also Samantha. So Samantha, do you have any questions when listening to Ben and Dawn?
I'm not sure that I have any specific ones. I think what's encouraging is that there are systems out there that will definitely do what we want to, but it's tailoring it to work for us, and really how what we do want to explore that. We've got a couple of work streams, not just only this pilot closure and restrictions, but we've got a couple of work streams that are trying to move us on over the next 18 months, couple of years. So we'll definitely be exploring that, and what we can utilise to give us what we need.
Okay, that's a good message for Dawn and Ben, and interesting. And Dawn, what's your final message here, if you have one?
Yeah, I mean, first, I was super impressed by just kind of the thoroughness of your analysis of the issue, which is amazing. So I guess that's just a comment that I think that's so amazing, because I see so many cities don't have the resources to do that. And so it's not really a message for you, but just in general, I think, you know, and I was in city government and trained in urban planning, and I think sometimes we get so wrapped up in having like the perfect plan and everything figured out that it can almost like stop us from acting until we're like sure that we're going to have the perfect deployment. And I get that, because like the newspapers are like brutal, and if something's not perfect, like people really go after you. So like I kind of get that like kind of trepidation that some cities have. I'm seeing more kind of get out of that, but I think that would be kind of my message is find a way to try things in the real world. Get as much data as you can to inform that, but you don't need to have the perfect plan or everything figured out to start trying things and learning so much very quickly. You could learn, I think, more in a 3-month pilot than you would in like a 3-year study sometimes. So where you can, I think it's good to just start trying things and try them at a scale that is manageable and is a level of kind of risk reward that you think is tolerable in your kind of political context.
Okay, so essentially do pilots. I like what I hear. And Ben, what's your final message? You have 1 minute.
I'll keep it very brief. I just think now, you know, there's some great partners here with Dawn, Kerb, Samantha. I think this is the right place for the discussion, and sign to partner up through trial. I know the guys from Grid are online as well, who look particularly at loading bays. I think there's a lot more to come from collaboration and keeping the discussion active. Maybe if there's time, I just ask Samantha, if she had a magic wand as a local authority, what could we give her tomorrow to help with this issue today?
Okay, Samantha, go ahead.
Oh God, that is impossible. I don't know if I can answer that. I think somebody said, a colleague said years ago, that people think transport planners are lazy witches, in the sense that we've got the skills and spells to do magic, but we just can't be bothered to use them. And I think actually that isn't true. The reason it's difficult is because we've got competing needs, and we think all those needs are legitimate. It's how we balance them and create a better environment whilst we're balancing legitimate needs. I don't think there's much going on there that we would say this is illegal in our kind of moral or ethical senses, or even our objectives. How do we get what's happening into an acceptable in today's terms? It's always a moving thing, but people are starting to walk more, want to walk more, and we have a zero emission ambition. We also have a zero accidents, zero KSI, killed and seriously injured ambition, and a lot of this is about shifting the space to people rather than vehicles. So yeah, no magic wand. I don't think you can't take away the function of the city unless you took away the function of the city. That's not really what we want to do.
Okay. So our time is up. Thank you everyone for listening in, and thank you for Samantha for preparing your presentation, and for also for Dawn for going up early, having breakfast, and then talking to us, and also Ben for on the Spark here being able to join in our discussion. Very nice, and thank you everyone for listening. And